thanking God that you're still breathing, hearing a newborn baby cry, like raising your hands.
The man you just saw in that video was 29-year-old youth pastor Zachary Radcliffe. Before his arrest, Zachary was very active and outspoken in the political world, and he was deeply involved in his church. But as it turns out, Zachary was a hardcore pedophile. Zachary was arrested last year after authorities were given a tip. And when they investigated him, what they found was nothing short of disturbing. Since at least 2011, Zachary had been molesting children whose ages ranged from 12 to 17 years old. He had also been soliciting these children to have them send him sexually abusive material. And while all this was going on, he was playing for large crowds and hanging out with the political elite. So Zachary was finally arrested in October of 2024. Zachary was finally arrested in 2024, and in 2025, this is what the judge presiding over his case had to say. I don't say this lightly at all, not how I operate my life, and certainly not how I operate as a judge, but in my 25 so plus years, I've seen a lot. This ranks up with one of the most egregious predators I have ever seen as it regards individuals. Thankfully, I think Zachary's going to be in prison for a long time, but it always seems like these groups, like youth groups at churches, attract the worst of the worst from society. For a guy like Zachary, he might have seen an open buffet.
The urban legend about mermaids, and it involves Mario Moreno, aka Cantinflas. I don't know if you know who that is.
Of course, yeah.
For those of you who don't know who that is a very, very famous Mexican actor. At the very peak of his career, he had everything he ever wanted. He was a top comedian for, the Mexican industry. He had the houses, the money, his family was set. But in this urban legend, it's told that even though he had everything he ever wanted, there was one thing that he was never able to experience.
What?
See a mermaid. So he was at a bar one day by himself, and then some guy by the name of Carlos Lorenzo approaches him and is like, do you really want to see a mermaid? And he's like, yeah, that's all I ever wanted. He had this obsession with mermaids and he wanted to see a real life mermaid. So this guy Carlos tells him, okay, what you're gonna do is you're gonna buy a mansion by the edge of the sea, and you're gonna have a statue of you facing out into the ocean, and whenever you go at night and you stand next to that statue and you look down into the water, you're gonna see mermaids. So that's exactly what he did, and he actually made a statue exactly how the legend says, that's facing, waiting for something in the ocean.
Oh, it's a real life statue?
Yeah.
Oh, what the?
It is also said that sometimes at night you can still see some mermaids approaching, waiting for him to be at the edge of the house and shit.
What the?
Like I said, this is just an urban legend.
Yeah, of course.
And also, I want to pull up a couple of videos that went viral years ago. And
whenever mermaids were popular?
At this time, bro, I feel like mermaids were like at its peak.
I feel like what kind of boosted its popularity was the mockumentary, Mermaids the Body Found.
There were 3 childhood friends who always swore they'd stick together. Best friends to the end, they used to say. Kyle was the grounded one, Dave was the brains, and then there was Jimmy, the wild card. Addicted to poker and chasing adrenaline like it was oxygen. Over time, Jimmy's addiction spiraled out of control. He racked up huge losses until one day, he found himself in $30,000 in debt to the kind of men who were very dangerous. They gave him a deadline, pay up or die. Panicked, Jimmy turned to Kyle and Dave. Desperate, he explained everything. After a long pause, they looked at him and said the words they always did, best friends to the end, and they meant it. They agreed to help, and Jimmy had a plan, a bank job. A in-and-out job and $50,000 split 3 ways, enough to pay the debt and disappear for good. But as they pulled up to the bank, a black van screeched to a stop in front of them. Before they could react, 5 masked men jumped out, guns drawn. Everything went black. When Kyle and Dave woke up, they were gagged and tied on the floor of the van, heart pounding in the darkness. Then they saw Jimmy, sitting calmly, staring at them. "I'm sorry guys," he said, emotionless. "But I need more than 50 grand, and the organ market is booming these days."
Kaylana Turner's body has just been found a year after she mysteriously disappeared, and only 900 feet from where her car was found abandoned. This story is incredibly heartbreaking. So, 28-year-old Kaylana disappeared on March 10th, 2023. The night before she disappeared, she was staying with a friend in Silsbee, Texas, but when that friend left for work, Kaylana appeared lost and confused. She reached out to a friend in Austin and told him that she didn't know where she was, so it's believed that she was planning on driving to Austin. But later that day, she ended up at a house in Tomball, Texas, and fell asleep in her car in the driveway. The woman who owned the house didn't know Kaylana at all, and when she refused to leave the driveway, the woman called the police. When police arrived, they tried to open up her door, but Kaylana backed up and almost hit one of the deputies. She then crashed into a fence on the front lawn. A deputy then grabbed a 2x4 piece of wood and broke in Kaylana's driver's side window, which made her drive off, and she ended up crashing into a wooded area about a mile away. She then got out and started running barefoot into the woods, leaving behind her purse and phone. This was the last time that she was ever seen alive. Her family says that she was having a mental health crisis, likely from a recent change in medication. Kaylana had cardiac issues as well as asthma, but she also had PTSD, and she was recently prescribed a different medication for that. Her family believes that she may have had a bad reaction to the new meds, and in the 4 days before she went missing, she had hardly slept at all. So when she woke up in that woman's driveway, she was disoriented and likely in a fight or flight mode. Over the year that Kaylana was missing, there were multiple searches for her, but it was like she vanished into thin air. That is until April 19th of this year, when Texas EquiSearch was conducting a search for her on a private property in Magnolia. This was actually supposed to be their final search for her, but during that final search, they stumbled across human remains in a heavily wooded area. And after comparing dental records, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Kaylana. What's incredibly sad is that her body was found only 900 feet from where her car was found abandoned a year ago. Her cause of death is still being determined, but authorities say no foul play is suspected. Kaylana's family says that the day she went missing, authorities treated her like a fugitive and didn't realize that she was in the middle of a mental health crisis. Instead, they reacted to her in such a hostile way, and it's left many wondering, had they realized that she was in the middle of a mental health crisis, if this would have turned out any different. Authorities were telling the family and putting out information that just wasn't true, which included sightings of Kaylana. And it really seems like authorities just didn't take the case seriously from the very beginning. Just by looking at the Facebook page created to help finding her, it's so clear how much Kaylana was loved by everyone. She was a person that was filled with love and kindness, and there truly was just no one like her. I'm wishing her family nothing but peace and healing during this horrible time, and I'm hoping that more answers will come to light.
It's known as Canada's most spooky crime case, so don't say I didn't warn you. This is the case of the Jack family. Firstly, before I get into this crime case today, I really want to just say a massive thank you for 1 million followers. It feels very surreal. It feels almost like a practical joke. Not sure why this has happened, but thank you so much, guys, for sticking with me and for your lovely comments and your lovely messages. I really do appreciate absolutely every single one of you. I've got some really exciting new things coming up which I can't wait to announce, and I'm going to be using my platform to spread more awareness about cases like this. It was 1989 in British Columbia, Canada. Ronald and Doreen Jack were childhood sweethearts. They were a lovely couple, but they lived in poverty the majority of their childhood, so money was always tight. They were always used to scrimping and saving. They had 2 sons, Russell and Ryan, aged 9 and 4, and they really had to graft to get by in life. Unfortunately, though, Ronald suffered a back injury, and this actually left him without a job, unable to work for a while, and therefore they were obviously struggling even more financially. Some reports even say that Doreen had to resort to stealing at some points, things like children's medicine when her kids were sick, which is just, I can't imagine being in that such a desperate situation. It's also believed that Ronald might have run up some debts as well, but they'd really do anything to make ends meet, even if it meant jumping on any opportunities that came their way. And it felt at the time almost like somebody was looking out for them. Ronald suddenly was approached in a pub by a stranger with this amazing opportunity. Now, it almost seemed too good to be true. There was a job available at a logging camp. They would get transport there, Doreen could work there as a cook as well, and they would even arrange childcare for the children. They felt like they had no option but to grab this opportunity with both hands. They were last seen getting into a random man's truck, supposedly due to return after 2 weeks. And this is roughly what this man looked like, the stranger whose truck they got into. The sketch was done quite far down the line and was compiled from some eyewitness accounts. On the 2nd of August 1989, Ronald gave his mum a ring and she would never hear of him again. Now, as I said, the family were due to be gone for 2 weeks, so it was only really after this time had passed that their family and friends really started to worry about them. There was no sign of them at all. They just never returned, and they were officially reported missing on the 25th of the month. Their extended family were really frustrated about the lack of urgency from authorities. It kind of just seemed like they were dragging their feet. Time went on and help was really very few and far between, and there was no news about the family. That was until police got a call on the 28th of January 1996. Bear in mind, this was almost a decade after the family went missing, and this call was absolutely terrifying. A mysterious voice on the end of the line stated, "The Jack family are buried in the south end of," and then they said an unspecified ranch. And nobody had a clue about who this mystery caller was. They left no information about themselves, and there was also seemingly no kind of motive for somebody to leave a message like this. A university even tried to analyze the voice at the end of the phone, but to this day, the caller has yet to be identified. Now, the family felt the lack of coverage given to the case was due to them being Indigenous people. Crime Stoppers eventually offered up to $2,000 for information leading to the whereabouts of the Jack family, but to this day, 35 years later, there is still no sign of them. It seems like they vanished into thin air.
15-year-old James Gordon picked up a .22 caliber long barrel rifle and executed his entire family. His father, his mother, and his 17-year-old sister. No struggle, no warning, just cold, calculated murder. When questioned, James showed a little emotion. He said he hated them, claiming he was sick of his mother's constant chewing, his sister's annoying accent, and his father's disapproval of his political opinions. After a 6-month trial, James wasn't found guilty. He was found insane. The jury believed he wasn't in his right mind and acquitted him of all charges, sending him to Rusk State Hospital in Texas in 1968. He spent 6 years there before being quietly released back into the world. 2 years later, James disappeared completely. He changed his name, severed ties with his past, and vanished into society. Until 40 years later, James re-emerged, this time as an award-winning professor of psychology. He had built an entirely new life, one filled with accolades, recognition, and students who admired him. But when his real identity was uncovered, it sent shockwaves through the community. Even the mayor called for his removal, labeling him a murderer hiding in plain sight. But the university refused. They stood by him, saying he had served his time and that the man he used to be no longer existed. This case is as disturbing as it is surreal. A teenager killer who butchered his own family, now shaping young minds in a classroom. It makes you wonder, how well do we ever really know the people around us?
So have you ever heard your name just out of nowhere and you're like, yo, wait, did my mom call me? You go to your mom, she's not the one who called you.
Yeah, all the time, bro, yeah.
Or your little sister, or your brother, or your older brother. So the scary way of looking at it, and the scary way that people think of it, is that it's actually demons trying to take your soul and trying to bring you into a different dimension. Or it could also be an evil entity in the house itself is trying to fuck with you. But then there's another way of looking at it, or somebody in your family in dear need of help, and it's their soul literally reaching out to you in the spirit world.
Yo, I got the fucking chills, bro. What the that's actually like a really
Interesting way of seeing it.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
Like on some telepathic
yeah.
bro. Some other people are also saying that it's your spirit guides and stuff like that. So there's many ways of seeing that, but I know a lot of people have experienced the whole hearing your name and you're just like, what the
I remember one time, right? So I was home alone. I think I was in a room playing video games or something like that. I forgot what it was. And then I hear the door open. Because I used to have bells on my door. But I heard the bells. And I heard, like, my mom usually ends up greeting my dog with, like, a baby voice. Like, hi, Rocky. Like stuff like that.
No way, you...
And I heard her say, hi, Rocky. But, like, no one was there.
Oh, that's scary.
When I heard it, I thought it was my mom. But after a while, I noticed that there was no more noise. So I went to the living room. Rocky was in his bed sleeping. And nobody was home.
That's... scary, bro.
Like, I know I didn't hear my name, but I heard like my mom's voice say like, hi, Rocky.
That's weird, bro. Imagine it even scarier, bro. You, oh my gosh, hey, Rocky. And then instead of like...
Actress Michelle Trachtenberg was found dead this morning in New York City, and tributes to her are already flooding across social media. It isn't known exactly how Michelle died, but it is known that she recently received a liver transplant. So people are hypothesizing that this could have had something to do with that. Michelle started her acting career at just 3 years old, appearing in commercials. And I definitely remember her starring in a number of shows and movies when I was younger, including shows like The Adventures of Pete and Pete and Harriet the Spy. Michelle also had prominent roles in shows like Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and people all over the world loved the roles that she took on and the films and TV shows that she appeared in. Now, Michelle in the past had been pretty open about some of the abuse that she faced on the sets of TV shows and movies that she worked on. And I think that this news comes as a shock to a lot of people because, like I mentioned before, she was only 39 years old. Obviously, this is really sad news and my thoughts go out to her family. But if we find anything else out, I'll be sure to update everybody on here. And yeah, this is just really sad news.
What you're about to see is an attempted kidnapping of a child while at school by this man. This video is incredibly disturbing, so watch at your own risk. This is 33-year-old Solomon Galligan. He's a registered sex offender who recently tried to kidnap a young boy at school. At around 2:20 p.m. on April 19th, he walked onto the playground of Black Forest Hills Elementary School and approached the 5th graders who were at recess. After a few minutes, he lunged at the children and tried to grab a young boy before tripping and falling over a blanket that he was carrying. Solomon then got back up and tried going after the boy again, but the other kids ran away and started yelling "stranger danger," which is what caught the teacher's attention and made Solomon leave the school property. Obviously, because of this, authorities were notified, and the boy who Solomon targeted told police his description and that he had white powder on his face and smelled like alcohol. The Cherry Creek School District then emailed the parents explaining what happened and said that if they wanted to pick up their kids as a result, that it was okay to do so. And after seeing this email, one of the parents saw a man fitting Solomon's description at a nearby Walgreens and contacted authorities. It was there that police found Solomon, who asked to be taken to the hospital after claiming to have been assaulted. After taking him to an urgent care, an officer ran a background check on him and found that he was a registered sex offender. Solomon was then arrested and has since been charged with kidnapping and child abuse. He is currently being held in the Arapahoe County Jail on a $25,000 bond. What's incredibly alarming is that Solomon has a lengthy criminal history which includes charges of assault, burglary, and sex crimes. In 2011, he was convicted on a charge of non-consent sexual contact, and according to his family, he's been in and out of jail for the past 12 years, but he always gets a slap on the wrist and is let out. Solomon's family says that his troubles really began when he was 16 years old and diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. They said that he ran away a lot and always seemed to get into trouble, but he ran away for good when he was 18 years old. He reportedly ends up in jail every 6 months or so, and his family says that that's the only time that they ever know where he's at. They also said that they're happy when he's in jail because he's not out causing harm to innocent people. His family thinks that the system is failing him and his victims because of the horrible cycle of being arrested, then being deemed incompetent to stand trial because of his mental health. He's then sent off to be institutionalized, but every single time there's always a shortage of beds in the mental health facilities, so he's always released back into society. As for the school, the Cherry Creek School District is reportedly launching an investigation into how Solomon went unnoticed for so long on school property. The school released a statement saying that improvements are being made and that they have changed the supervision area so that teachers on recess always have full visibility of the students. They've gone on to say that all staff have been retrained in safety protocols, but it took 10 full days to have the meeting and for these new protocols to be put in place. Because of this, parents of the kids at the school want the principal to be fired and have certain employees be put on administrative leave. But the school won't take any action until the investigation is complete. This story is so scary, and I can't even imagine what it was like to see this man running up to you, especially as a child.
Massive trigger warning here, this beauty queen's murder is known as Australia's most barbaric killing ever. It was February 1986 in New South Wales, Australia. Anita Cobby, as you can see, was a beautiful 26-year-old woman. She'd been in beauty pageants from a young age and clearly was extremely stunning. She could honestly have made it as a professional model, but her heart was actually in nursing. Her mum Peggy had been a nurse when she was growing up, and she really just kind of had this love for it. She wanted to follow in her mum's footsteps. So she trained as a nurse too and was working in Sydney Hospital when she met her husband John Cobby. The pair ended up getting married in 1982, but unfortunately they ended up separating. In the year in question, she was living with her parents. Now, this is a little bit confusing, but I think that the couple were just kind of on and off. They had split up, but they were on really good terms and they'd even considered getting back together. But Anita's tragic murder meant they never got the chance to rekindle their love. Now, as I said, Anita worked in Sydney Hospital and had a bit of a commute on the train to and from her job every day. On the 2nd of February, she finished her shift at 3 p.m. and headed for some food with her girlfriends. After she did that, she headed back on the train home to Blacktown Station. And it was kind of regular that she would get back to the station and use a public phone to either call for her family to give her a lift or call a taxi. But for some reason on the day in question, she didn't make that call, and some believe that this was due to the payphone being out of order. Anita was spotted by witnesses walking home alone and then seemingly vanished. Her parents were obviously very concerned when she never turned up home. They reported her missing to police, but it wasn't long before a tragic discovery was made. Anita's lifeless body was found by a farmer in a secluded paddock, and she horrifically had to be identified by her wedding ring, which she was still wearing. As I said, the pair had kind of decided to almost like get back together. And because of this, Anita's husband was prime suspect from early on, but he was very quickly ruled out due to having an alibi. Anita's autopsy revealed some devastating information. The innocent woman had been brutally attacked, and when I say brutally attacked, like, it doesn't even bear thinking about your loved one going through this. She'd been SA'd, tortured, and almost decapitated by her attacker or attackers. And the public outcry only grew when the gruesome details were announced on a radio show to the general public. Now, it transpired that a white car had been stolen that evening, and a tip-off came in which led police to a group of men. This was John Travers and Michael Murdoch, both 19, and three brothers, Leslie Murphy, 22, Gary Murphy, 28, and Michael Murphy, 33. Now, this group all had a huge history of crime and criminal behaviour. They had violent crime, theft, substance use, armed robbery, and on their records. John was also seemingly well known in the area for carrying a weapon. And John pretty much very quickly admitted to stealing that white car and was arrested. And all of the men were quickly telling very different stories, so it was clear that nobody was telling the truth. John's girlfriend, obviously by this point, was very suspicious of John herself, hearing all of this stuff in the news, and she agreed to help police by wearing a wire. It transpired the group of men had pulled up to Anita in the stolen car that night and forced her inside, kicking and screaming. It also came out later that a witness had in fact seen Anita get dragged into this car and did report this to police. The group viciously SA'd her despite her pleas to be let go. They broke her nose and cheekbones and repeatedly AR'd her. They drove her to a remote paddock and almost decapitated her before leaving her there to die. And it's believed that they did this because they were just convinced that she knew who they were. So in order to get away with it, they might as well just kill her. I cannot imagine the kind of person you have to be to not only do this, but also have friends that you feel comfortable enough calculating this with and coming up with such an evil plan, because these men clearly went out that evening with the intention to do this. Thankfully, all of these men were found guilty of and murder and were given life without the possibility of parole.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 1. This game is called the Picture Game, and it's a paranormal game that allows you to take pictures of ghosts. To play the game, you will need at least 2 people and a phone with a flash. Then find an empty room and sit directly across from each other. Then turn off the lights and hold hands and say, "I trust you" to each other. Now say, "The door is open, please come in" 3 times at the same time. Now open your eyes. Whatever wanted to come into the room is now in there. Now each of you grab your phone and take a picture of each other while saying, "I caught you." Now do this 3 times each. Now both of you close your eyes again and say, "It's time to go home." Turn on the lights and then look at the photos you guys took of each other. One of you would then see a ghost standing behind you, and the other one won't, but the person that has the ghost behind them will experience paranormal activity for at least a week. Now the ghost won't harm you at all, but it would do its best to completely terrify you. So are you playing this game? Because I'm definitely not.
Murder conviction was overturned after the eyewitness was found to be legally blind. A man from Chicago spent 12 years behind bars due to eyewitness testimony from someone who was found to be legally blind. Darian Harris was just 18 years old when he was convicted of the murder of Rondell Moore. Rondell had been shot at a petrol station in 2011 and had passed away. Darien was previously sentenced to 76 years in prison for the crime and is now 30 years old. However, a recent revelation changed all of that. The eyewitness Dexter Saffold proved crucial in the murder conviction and picked Darien out of a police lineup just a few days after the killing. Darien's family, though, maintained that he'd actually been at home watching the NBA playoffs during the time of the killing. Darien had just been about to graduate high school when he was accused of the murder. Dexter was later found to have been legally blind during the fatal shooting. It transpired that he had markedly reduced vision, especially at night. Prosecutors are reportedly planning to retry Darien on the murder charge.
I was stranded in an airport for 18 years. My name is Mehran Karimi Nasri, and I was born in 1942 in Iran. My story is quite unique. In 1986, I attempted to travel to England to seek political asylum, but unfortunately, I lost my documents during a layover in Paris. Without proper documentation, I found myself stuck at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The French authorities couldn't allow me entry into France, and I couldn't return to Iran as I feared for my life. So, I remained stranded in the airport transit zone from 1988 to 2006. Over the years, I learned to survive in this confined space, relying on the generosity of passengers and airport staff for food and other necessities. My life was marked by a daily routine of sleeping on a bench, reading newspapers, and writing in my journal. My story garnered international media attention, inspiring the movie The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks. Eventually, in 2006, I was hospitalized for health issues, and the French authorities granted me permission to reside in France. Since then, I have been living in a shelter, attempting to rebuild my life after those long years spent in the airport.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how Malaysia Flight 370 completely disappeared without a trace. Well, the video I'm about to show you shows what people are saying is Flight 370 disappearing through a portal, with 3 orbs rotating around it. Do you think this video is real or fake? Either way, it's extremely interesting and it's completely going viral. Here it is.
I was fired from my job, so I decided to crash the plane my boss was on. My name is David Burke, and on December 7, 1987, I did something irreparable. I was a father of 7, working for our airline as a ticket agent. At home, we were struggling financially, and on my salary, I could barely support my family. However, one day I was accused of stealing $69 from the cash register by my manager, Raymond Thompson. As a result, my boss fired me. The income I desperately needed for my family was suddenly gone. I was furious, and soon after, I decided to buy a ticket for the same flight as my former boss, Raymond. I smuggled a Magnum revolver onto the plane. After a 20-minute flight, I got up and handed Raymond a note before heading for the toilets. In the lavatory, I took out my Magnum revolver, and as soon as I was out of the lavatory, I approached Raymond and shot him twice in the chest. After that, I went through the cockpit, where I shot the stewardess and the 2 pilots. I took control of the wheel, and the plane quickly plunged. One of the passengers, who was a pilot, tried to stop me. However, I managed to shoot him. Tragically, the plane, with 43 people on board, crashed because of me, and all 43 died, including me.
My father didn't like my boyfriend, so we decided to kill him. We recorded this video shortly after committing our crime.
I don't know what to say. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. after murdering. Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Wow! Don't put that on the camera.
It was worth it.
And we had sex a lot today.
I'm Sierra Halseth. I'm a 16-year-old American girl. And in 2020, I fell in love with 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero. We were obsessed with each other and nothing could stand in the way of our love. However, there was one big problem. My own father, Daniel Halseth, disapproved of my relationship with Aaron because he was 2 years older than me and a bad influence on me. In addition, my mother, who was separated from my father, disapproved of the relationship between the two of us. They decided to forbid Aaron to see me. We were furious. Nothing could stand in the way of our love, so we decided to do something terrible. Aaron and I went to my father's house, where we brutally slaughtered him and set him on fire. We then hid him in the garage and tried to erase all traces. However, in the days following our deed, a video was discovered in which we confessed to our crime. We laughed and showed no remorse in the video. We quickly tried to escape from the police and leave the country, but to no avail. The judge found us both guilty, and we were both sentenced to 22 years in prison. Should we be given a second chance?
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so the video you're about to see shows a skier going down a mountain when suddenly a bear starts chasing her. And I mean starts chasing her to kill her. And the entire time she doesn't see the bear or realize it's chasing her because she's listening to Work by Rihanna. She was seconds away from death. Here's the video.
This mum of 7 was found dead with a dog collar wrapped around her neck. Leah Penny was 31 from Malden, Massachusetts. She was a mother of 7 living in Lebanon Street in 2017. Leah had suffered with addiction issues in the past, but she'd managed to get herself clean and was a dedicated mother. She knew she had a precious second chance with her children, but it would be snatched away from her in the most devastating way. Neighbours described Leah as a wonderful mother and the community was stunned by her tragic end. Police responded to a 911 call in June that year and headed to Leah's address. When they arrived, they found her deceased with a dog collar wrapped around her neck at the bottom of her stairs. 2 of Leah's children were upstairs in the cot unharmed. The children's father was Ryan Power, but he was nowhere to be seen. Ryan's mum was actually the one that found Leah at the bottom of the stairs after going round to look after her grandchildren. Leah's other children were aged 14, 10, 9, 6 and 4 at the time. 32-year-old Ryan was immediately a suspect. He'd apparently left home the night before following an argument. He was eventually tracked down in New Hampshire the day after when police managed to trace his location through a phone call that he'd made to his mum. Now Ryan shockingly had been previously charged with assault and battery on Leah in the May. Authorities were seeking a restraining order, but it had never been granted. Leah's mum stated that Ryan had been abusive to her throughout the relationship and had isolated her from family and friends. He'd once gone as far as to kidnap one of their children, and she was terrified to leave him due to what he was capable of. Leah's mum also recalled her posting a chilling Facebook status. It reportedly said, "Ryan and I got into it again tonight, and if you ever find me dead, you'll know Ryan did it." Ryan admitted to choking Leah and was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was given life in prison without parole.
These are videos with the most haunting backstories, and this series is going to be crazy. This is security footage of Luca Magnotta kidnapping a man named Jung Lin, before making the infamous one lunatic, one ice pick video. He tied him to a bed and then with an ice pick he stabbed Jun Lin until he died. After he died, Luca did the following. He cut his head, legs, and arms off and then started sexually abusing the body. He stuck a bottle inside of Jun Lin's body and even ate his flesh, and also fed the flesh to the dog in the room. You also see him take Jun Lin's body parts to the garbage can in the video too, which is right here. Luca Magnotta then mailed Jun Lin's hands and feet to elementary schools and federal political party offices. And after a video depicting the murder was posted online, which I explained on this channel in detail, Luca Magnotta fled Canada, becoming the subject of an Interpol red notice and prompting an international manhunt. In 2012, he was arrested in an internet cafe in Berlin while searching himself up on the internet. The video that Luca posted of him committing the murder is just awful and inhumane. This man was obsessed with being famous and did anything to do so. He wanted to become a serial killer, but he got caught before he could carry out any more gruesome murders like this. I don't recommend searching for this video at all, especially if you've seen my video explaining it already. But if you're interested in this case, there is a Netflix documentary called Don't F With Cats that explains the case start to finish, and I highly recommend watching that instead of the one lunatic, one ice pick video. This footage is just so haunting because Jun Lin thought he was going to have a fun night with the stranger he just met, but instead it turned into a living nightmare. And what's even more sinister is that this wasn't a random murder. Luca planned this before Jun Lin even arrived at the place he was staying at.
This girl from Nuneaton was last seen alive on her Ring doorbell. Within an hour, she would be dead. Megan Newborough was 23 years old and a bright HR advisor. She met her colleague 30-year-old Ross McCullum at work. The pair initially got on and started dating. Just a few weeks later, things would end in tragedy. She left the house reportedly in a great mood on Friday, the 6th of August 2021 at around 7:30. She told family she was just going for a walk. Tragically, she had no idea what was about to happen to her. Obviously, when she failed to return home, alarm bells started to ring. Her family made numerous calls, but nobody had seen her or heard from her. They reported her missing to police and were really terrified when they found her phone in a bush. They had used the Find My iPhone app, and the discovery of the phone was obviously deeply concerning. Police knew this was now likely to be a kidnap. They decided to speak to Ross, as the pair had been dating, so he was an obvious person of interest. He told police that she had been with him that evening, but left at 9 p.m. to get a McDonald's. He denied seeing her since then. Now, Megan's phone actually had messages off Ross that evening, and he left her a voicemail to say how much he loved her. However, police were obviously incredibly suspicious. After he was extensively interviewed, he eventually confessed to killing her. It transpired that Megan had gone to Ross's house where he strangled her and cut her throat. He then coldly texted her phone to tell her how amazing she was in order to throw police off the scent. He then put her body in her car and drove to a remote location where he dumped her body. He threw her phone into that bush on the way. He was captured on CCTV changing his clothes by her car. After then ditching the car in Loughborough, he casually got a taxi home. He then spent the evening looking at serial killers online and looking at indecent images and videos. He claimed he acted in a blind rage after remembering SA from his childhood. He was jailed for life with a minimum of 23 years, and multiple inmates have reported that he has bragged about the killing while inside prison.
The Chris Chan story is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about, and you don't want to hear what they did with their mother. The story of Chris Chan is a very, very disturbing and complicated one. But in 2007, she created a comic called Sonichu, and for some reason people were really attracted to this, and they started to become infatuated with the comic's creator, Chris Chan. Now, the comics themselves are bizarre, but they're not really that special. And people really latched onto this story for some reason. They wanted to follow Chris Chan's life, and a lot of this original stuff that was going on was trolling, but it began to take a really, really strange turn. Now, in 2015, Chris and her mom had to attend a court hearing because allegedly she had assaulted a video game store employee. And at that point, people began to notice that Chris was very close to her mom. Then, the following year in 2016, Chris wrote a Facebook post defending a mother and son in Mexico who said that they were in love with each other. She basically wrote and defended incest and said that in some cases it isn't bad if a parent and their offspring have these relations with each other. And she even wrote that she had had dreams of having intercourse with her own mother. But then, fast forward to 2021, and screenshots and a recording were leaked that allegedly show Chris Chan discussing how they have abused and slept with their own mother. Apparently, the person on this recording that claims to be Chris claims that they have assaulted their mother 3 times a week for the last couple of months, and that the mom has memory problems and can't really recall what's going on. This was obviously concerning, but on August 1st, 2021, this all came to a head when Chris Chan was arrested on a felony incest charge. Yes, Chris was accused of actually having sex with their own mother. Now, this is a felony in Virginia, the state that Chris lives in, but to this date, there's still no real resolution in the case. Apparently, Chris was released from jail on March 27th of this year and has another hearing on August 8th when we're going to find out more details about exactly what happened, what evidence prosecutors have. But no matter how you look at this entire situation, this is just disturbing to me.
At 8:30 this morning, a 15-year-old girl was murdered on her way to school in Croydon, South London. Officers were on the scene within 2 minutes of receiving a 999 call to say that a schoolgirl had been stabbed. A bus driver and a passerby tried to resuscitate the girl, but their efforts were futile and tragically she died at the scene. A cordon could be seen surrounding a double-decker bus, and a white tent was also erected outside the Whitgift Centre. A bunch of flowers had also been placed at the scene. Shockingly, this is the 15th teenage homicide just this year, with 3 months still to go. Last year there were 14. In the last 12 months, Croydon has had more stabbings than any other London borough, with 211 knife crime offences recorded. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder, and it's thought that he was known to the victim. I'll update, obviously, in the comments when there is any more information on this case.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This pair did on Christmas Eve is like something out of a horror film. It was Christmas in Washington State in 2007. Families were gathering together in anticipation of the big day and sharing gifts. However, 29-year-old Michelle Anderson and her boyfriend had an entirely different idea of what they would do during the festive season. Michelle's boyfriend was Joseph McEnroe. The pair headed over to Michelle's family home on Christmas Eve. Michelle was reportedly angry with her parents as they had recently requested that she started paying rent. At 29 years old, they felt that she needed to start contributing to the household. The home was in a rural area and Michelle had her own space in a caravan on her parents' land. So far, she'd been living there for free. Michelle and her boyfriend armed themselves and headed to the home that afternoon. When they arrived, her parents, Judy and Wayne, were sat there wrapping gifts. Joseph distracted Judy while Michelle tried to shoot her dad. However, the gun jammed, so Joseph took over and shot both parents. The pair then took the bodies outside and cleaned the house. They knew some visitors were on the way. It wasn't long before Michelle's 32-year-old brother Scott and his wife Erica would arrive. They also had with them their 2 children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They'd all been excited to spend Christmas with their family, not realising they wouldn't even make it to Christmas Day. Michelle shot Scott and killed him. The pair then both shot Erica, who fell to the ground injured. She managed to crawl her way to the phone and ring police. Dispatchers could reportedly hear a horrifying scene going on in the background of the call. That was until Joseph snatched the phone off Erica and smashed it on the ground. He then shot her again, killing her. He then shot and killed the 2 innocent children because he apparently didn't want them to be scarred for life. Infuriatingly, when police arrived at the property, they found the gate was locked, so they simply left. It wasn't until Boxing Day that the massacre was uncovered. Judy's best friend had arrived to investigate when she didn't turn up for work. Peering through the window, she saw 2 dead bodies on the floor and rang police. Michelle and Joseph were questioned and admitted to the killings. Michelle said she was angry about being asked for rent and also angry at her brother for owing her money. They were both given life in prison.
This story is absolutely heartbreaking. Both of these babies died on separate occasions while in the care of their grandmother. Just days before Christmas in 2021, Kyla Nix left her 16-month-old son Ezra in the care of her mother Tracy. Tracy's partner was out running errands and Tracy fell asleep in the living room on the couch. When she woke up, she couldn't find Ezra in the house. She went out into the garden and found him face down in the garden pond. Instead of immediately calling 911, Tracy started CPR and phoned her partner to tell him what had happened to Ezra. He then phoned Ezra's father, Drew, and said, "Something's happened to Ezra." When Kyla heard that something had happened to Ezra, she immediately jumped in her car and started driving. She was doing 85 miles an hour, and at 6 months pregnant, she got in a head-on collision with another car. She could see the air ambulance heading to her mother's house, and she wasn't looking where she was going. She left the car and started running, desperately trying to get to her son. Ezra was taken to hospital, but died on December 23rd in his parents' arms, and just 3 months later, Kyla gave birth to her daughter Uriel. Kyla and Drew were absolutely devastated about their son's death, but it was ruled an accident and they believed in second chances, and Kyla still wanted her mother in her life. Tracy was usually supervised when she had visitation rights to Uriel, but on November 22nd, she was with her alone. She was out for lunch with friends, and Kyla thought that Uriel would be perfectly safe. Tracy drove home after lunch with Uriel in the back of the car, and she went inside to practice piano. One of Tracy's grandsons arrived at the house, and when he entered through the front door, Tracy immediately realised that she'd left Uriel in the back of her SUV. She'd been left in the back of that car all afternoon in 90-degree heat with the windows up. She didn't stand a chance. When Drew arrived to collect his daughter, he saw ambulances and immediately had flashbacks to Ezra's death. There was absolutely nothing paramedics could do to save Uriel, and the heartbreaking news then had to be broken to Kyla. Police showed up at her door and told her that her baby was dead. At first she was really confused as she thought they were talking about Ezra, but they said, "No, Kyla, Uriel is dead." Kyla and Drew are now demanding that Tracy goes to jail. Kyla said, "If I'm objective, she needs to go to jail. As her daughter, it breaks my heart to say it, but as their mother, I demand it." Tracy has been charged with manslaughter and faces up to 30 years behind bars for Uriel's death, meaning if she's found guilty, she could spend the rest of her life behind bars.
This is Shannon McCool, one of the worst pedophiles of all time. I'm going to warn you right now, this story is incredibly disturbing and hard to listen to, so viewer discretion is advised. Shannon McCool is from Australia, and according to interviews that he gave after his arrest, he started having these feelings towards other children when he was 15 years old. So from a very young age, he felt these pedophilic behaviors and desires. In the year 2011, he began working for the Families SA, which is a part of the Australian government that oversees childcare and abuse. And through this government job, he was able to get access to hundreds of children. These kids had been through it all already. They came from abusive and negative backgrounds, and he took this and used it to his advantage. He was able to get access to these kids for years, and even though other employees reported that he had been acting inappropriately with these youngsters, nothing happened. The government agencies ignored these red flags and kept him under their employment. But in the shadows, Shannon was engaging in some of the most deplorable internet behavior I've ever read about. He was a moderator for a website called The Love Zone, a website which had connections to Peter Scully, Richard Huckle, and a number of other pedophiles that we've talked about here on my TikTok in the past. But apparently, for other pedophiles to get access to this massive library of CP and become a member of the Love Zone, they had to upload their own user-generated CP at least once a month. This means that Shannon wasn't just taking kids from residential homes, abusing them, filming the videos, and putting them up on the internet for other people to seek out. He was actually encouraging people all across the planet to commit their own atrocious things. And he would then tell them that if you want access to his media, you would have to upload your own. So he was encouraging just so much abuse across the planet. According to Shannon, the first time that he had done something like this was in 2011 when he picked up a kid from childcare, was driving him home, pulled the car over, touched him inappropriately, filmed it, and then uploaded it. And from that point going forward, he was gone, and he eventually worked his way up to being one of the biggest pedophiles on the internet, dealing CP to millions across the globe. One of his alleged offenses even includes the assault of an 18-month-old child. But eventually, Shannon's crimes would come to the light. And that's when Task Force Argo stepped in, a division of the Queensland Police Service who specifically investigate child exploitation and abuse online. I find it interesting that they use a scorpion as their logo for the task force because the scorpion is the natural predator of the Australian stone spider, and pedophiles in Australian prisons are referred to as stone spiders. Well, eventually, there's a longer story that I could go into this about how the police actually ended up running a pedophile website and busting a ton of people, but that led them to Shannon McCool's house. Now, when they investigated his home, they found over 53,000 CP images, a good number of which he was actually directly involved with producing. And in total, after all their investigation was completed, they had recovered over 100,000 CP still images and over 600 videos from Shannon. In 2015, he received 35 years in prison for his crimes, but recently his sentence was slashed. And I don't think that he'll be in there long enough. This former NFL player is one of the most evil men in the sport's history. Meet Darren Sharper, a former football safety who played in the NFL for 14 seasons. During the course of his career, Darren played on a number of different teams, including the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, and ultimately the New Orleans Saints. Now, Darren was an incredibly good player, and he frequently signed contracts for over $2 million a year. His career ended in the year 2010 after a devastating injury that he suffered. And it was after he retired from the NFL when he committed a string of despicable crimes. In March of 2011, two women in Miami came forward to the police and stated that Darren had drugged them and assaulted them in his condo. Now, even though both of these women had detailed matching accounts about what happened, they were taken to the hospital for grape examination. The investigation was closed by the Miami PD just 5 days after it was opened. And evidence shows that the detective on the case never even visited Darren's apartment, he never questioned Darren, and he never sent in the rape kits for further examination. And I think getting away with this really set Darren off. Next, in February of 2013, he helped drug a model at a Super Bowl party. And Darren's friend then proceeded to assault her. In August 2013, he allegedly assaulted another woman in New Orleans. Then in September 2013, he drugged two women with his friend and assaulted both of them. Now, keep in mind, every time that this was happening, these women were going to the police and investigations were being opened. But nothing was being done. Keep in mind, this was such a high-profile case that the prosecution eventually admitted that they, delayed some of the proceedings because they didn't want to mess this up. But in delaying these proceedings, Darren was allowed to continue on his spree of terror. October 2013, Darren drugs two women and assaults one of them in his hotel room. They go to the police and still nothing's done. November 2013, Darren comes across three students who go to the University of Arizona. He drugs all three of them and then assaults two of them. Both women underwent examinations within 12 hours of the assault and went to the police. January 2014, Darren meets two women at two different Hollywood parties. He then takes them back to his hotel room, drugs them, and assaults both of them, and they both go to the police. Then, the day after this previous assault in LA, Darren is in Las Vegas. He meets two women and a man that are out at a club drinking. And he drugs all three of them before he takes the two women back to his hotel room to assault both of them. So keep in mind, for a 9-month period, there were pending charges against Darren. He'd been reported to authorities multiple times for assaulting women, and yet none of these agencies worked together and he was allowed to roam the streets freely and keep committing crimes. This was an absolutely massive failure of the justice system, and this case still is so shocking because this really was an extended spree of crimes that he was just basically allowed to commit. In 2016, though, Darren was finally sentenced to 20 years in prison. And shockingly, he's going to be released from prison in 2028, which means he only served 12 years of that 20-year sentence. I personally don't think that's nearly enough for all of these assaults, but that's the American justice system for you.